Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, nice to meet you. Today we're going to presenting about early childhood trauma and its long-term impact on cognitive and emotional development, a systematic review and meta-analysis by Lin Fan and Tian Hu Kang from Analysis of Medicine in 2025. So, let us introduce our member of the group. The first one is me itself, Najwa Auliya Nadian Syiar, and my student ID is 081.
I'm Mauhibatul Tafidah and my student ID 016.
My name is Auliarifa Nurrahma and my student ID is 110.
Okay, so the next one, we are going to presenting about the topic that we already introduced to yourself. The first one is abstract. In this article is talking about trauma in early childhood, its long-term impact on children's emotional development. The goal of this research is to determine the impact of childhood trauma on children. The study summarizes and analyzes the effect of general trauma such as physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, bullying, caregiver separation, witnessing domestic violence, and chronic trauma related to war in early childhood on long-term impact on cognition and emotion memory. This is we are going to explain about the article, especially the goal of this research is to determine the impact of childhood trauma on the children.
So the next one is the objective. The objective from this article is 1. To identify and synthesize studies investigating the relationship between early childhood trauma and cognitive outcomes, including processing speed, attention, memory, and executive function. And the second, to evaluate the relationship between early childhood trauma and emotional outcomes, such as emotion regulation, recognition, and vulnerability to anxiety and depression. And the third, to investigate the neurobiological correlates of cognitive and emotional impairment in individuals exposed to trauma, including brain structure, function, and cognitively.
Okay, the next is method, research, design, and data. This study used a systematic review and meta-analysis approach following Prisma Quitlens. The data were collected from Google Scholar, PubMed, and Cochrane Library using keywords related to childhood trauma and cognitive and emotional development. The study includes peer-reviewed articles focusing on trauma before the age of 18 with quantitative data, while non-English and incomplete studies were excluded. The next is method selection and analysis. Initially, 465 studies were identified, and after screening titles, abstract, and full text, 9 studies were included. The data were extracted based on study characteristics and outcomes, and quality was assessed using the Newcastle-Ottawa scale and the Cochrane risk of bias tool. The analysis was conducted using R software with a random effect model, focusing on attention, memory, and emotion regulation with heterogeneity mesh using the I-square statistic.
So the next one is the findings, the result of the research that already did the author before. The findings indicate that childhood trauma has a significant impact on various aspects of cognitive functioning and emotional regulation. Specifically, we could see at the attention, the SMD or standardized mean difference. It could see that 2.37 point that and the working memory, the SMD, 3.55. It shows large deficit, suggesting that children with a history of trauma tend to experience difficulties in maintaining focus and actively processing and retaining information. In addition, emotion regulation, we could see in the presentation, the SMD is 1.25 and the executive function 1.61 also demonstrate considerable impairment. Also, the confidence interval for executive function approached zero, indicating that the result should be interpreted with caution. In contrast, processing speed show a smaller and non-significant effect. And its confidence interval includes 0. The high heterogeneity across studies is 77% until 98% reflects substantial variability, which may be attributed to differences in trauma types, participant and characteristic, and assessment method. Overall, the pooled effect in size is 1.57. It suggests that childhood trauma has broad impact on cognitive and emotional development, although its statistical significance is influenced by variability across studies.
So, from the results above, it was found in the discussion that 1. The systematic review and meta-analysis analyzed the long-term impact of early childhood trauma on cognitive and emotional development. So, in the study, synthesizes evidence from 9 high-quality studies to provide a comprehensive overview of how trauma disrupts important neurocognitive and emotional processes, as well as the broad implications of these impairments. The study findings are contextualized within the broader literature, including clinical and social implications. Study limitations are discussed, and recommendations for future research and practice are presented. The second, exposure to trauma during early childhood has a profound impact on cognitive components, including processing speed, attention, memory, and executive function. So, in these studies analyzed demonstrate that trauma not only directly impairs cognitive abilities, but also has long-term effects detectable throughout life. For example, like the Petkus et al. Found significant deficits in processing speed and attention in older adults who experienced childhood trauma, suggesting that the impact of trauma can persist for years after the event. The study by Feliconja et al. Also found cognitive deficits in individuals at high risk for psychosis, indicating that trauma may increase vulnerability in individuals already at risk. The third, regarding children emotional development, Hu et al. And Motson et al. Show that exposure to trauma impairs the ability to recognize and regulate emotions. So, this study suggests that individuals who experience the trauma struggle to regulate their emotional response, making them more susceptible to depression and anxiety. While research such as conducted by Marusak et al. Explored the neurobiological basis of these findings, finding increased amygdala activity and impaired cognitivity between the amygdala and the pregenual anterior cingulate cortex or PGACC in traumatized children. Difficulties in emotion regulation and processing likely stem from this neural change. And four, neurofeedback training or NFT has been shown to reduce PTSD symptoms and improve executive function in traumatized children, but also suggests that additional intervention or follow-up therapy may be necessary. So in this article, discuss about the potential tool for recovery from trauma include deficits has been demonstrated through intervention studies. Neurofeedback training or NFT has been shown to reduce PTSD symptoms and improve executive function in children who have experienced developmental trauma as demonstrated by Roque et al. But sustainable of these improvements vary, suggesting that additional interventions or follow-up therapy may be necessary. And five, there is high heterogeneity across domains, is square ranging from 77% to 98%, and reflecting variations in research methodology, populations, and measurement tools used. Next. And the findings, limitations, there's the one, the study design, sample population, and outcomes measures use varied widely, leading to variation and complicating comparisons between studies. So, for example, some studies focused on pediatric population, while others on adults, and the outcome measured varied, ranging from specific cognitive domains to broader emotional function. Furthermore, difference in age at trauma and the diversity of trauma types should be analyzed in more detail and subcategories with specific emphasis. And two, in most studies, the use of retrospective self or repost or recall of trauma experience is susceptible to recall bias. So it means many studies use recall to assess trauma experience. The problem is recall can be biased. It can overlook or even minimize the traumatic event. Therefore, the result can be inaccurate. Longitudinal research with more objective data is preferable. And the third, while most studies has large sample size, some intervention studies had relatively small sample size, which can decrease statistical power and reduce the reliability of effect size estimates. So while some studies have large sample size and the other of have a small one, and this making the result less robust and less generalizable. And the fourth, this review also did not systemically consider cultural and contextual factors. So, this research also has not paid much attention to cultural factor and socioeconomic conditions, even though these factors can influence how trauma impacts a person. Next, and what we can findings is implication from this article. There's one, early detection is essential for trauma management in individuals with early childhood. It means health professionals, educators, and social workers need to be trained to recognize the signs of trauma so that interventions can be implemented before the impact becomes more severe. And then the second, interventions focus on improving cognitive function and emotional regulation are essential, such as cognitive behavior therapy or CBT, trauma focused therapy, and family based interventions. And the third, a multidisciplinary approach is essential for addressing childhood trauma. So the collaboration between the healthcare professionals, educators, and families is essential to creating a supportive environment for children's recovery. And then the fourth, public policy also plays a crucial role in addressing the impacts of childhood trauma. So, in addition to direct interventions, public policy also play a crucial role in addressing that can, like a community-based prevention programs, increased access to mental health service, and social support for at-risk families can help reduce the prevalence and impact of the trauma. Next.
Okay, the last is conclusion. Based on findings, early childhood trauma has significant long-term effects on cognitive and emotional development, especially in attention, working memory, and emotion regulation. This effect can continue into adulthood, which show how important early identification and trauma-informed intervention are.
Okay, that's all for us. Thank you for your listening and your attention. We will say to goodbye. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.